Hello and welcome to another episode of our C# Basics tutorial series. In this episode we will get to learn what a method is. So we've actually already used a method, which was Godot.print, in which we entered a string, which would then be printed out into the console. And here we already can see what methods actually do. Here we enter something, and then the method does something. We can also look at it this way. A method could essentially also be used as a mathematical function. So for example, here we have our method f, and our integer y is the result of the method f, and as an input we will pass 10. In maths we now have to define f. It will probably look something like this. It will probably look something like this. We of course can't do this. We have to define it in a different way. To do that, we will go outside of our two comfy brackets and start to create our first method. To do this, we'll first specify what data type it returns. We could say an integer f, and open a new scope. And inside of these brackets, we will say what parameters this method should accept, integer x. And now we can say x times equals 20 and return x. We multiplied x, which is the input or the first parameter of our method, and multiplied it with 20. Then we returned that variable. What return does, it gives f the value of what we returned. So in this case, it has the value of 10 times 20, which is 200. If we now print it out by using the Godot.print method, we'll see that it worked. And it did. Now a mathematical function works similar, but there's a key difference from a mathematical function to a method in programming languages. And that is that they are able to do more than just maths. They're actually able to print as well. In fact, this right here is a function as well. This is being called from outside. Now what does this public override void mean? What public means we'll get to in the next episode. We'll get to what override means in a couple of episodes as well. But void is something we can discuss right now. So we can create for a function, for example, void, and call it print 20 times input. That probably isn't a real good name, but we'll leave it like that for now. This takes an integer x as an input, and what we now want to do is we print out x times 20. So now we don't return anything, we just do something. So when we call this method and enter 15, then we cannot store the result in a variable, as this does not return any value, so it has no value to store. We can also simplify this even more. In here we can call another method, say x equals f from x. What f does is it multiplies the input by 20 and returns the value. So if we store this in x and give it the input of x, we'll get 20 times x and store it in x, which we then print out, and therefore we did what the method was supposed to do. Of course, we can create a method for every data type. For a double, here return simply 2.0, or for a boolean, and even for everything else, of course. For example, for a string, get my name. So now I have a task for you. What you do is you create a method and returns the opposite of it. For example, if I have true as an input, it should return false. If I enter false as an input, it should return true. What you need for this is a logical operator and, of course, the basics of how to use methods. So pause the video right now. In a few seconds, we will solve this together. So let's create this method together. So we start out by entering bool, because we know that we want to have a boolean as a return type, and we call it, I don't know, reverse, and the input should of course also be a boolean, because, well, we want to reverse a boolean. What we simply do now is return not b, print the result out now, and true, and here it is, we got false. What I also wanted to show you is that a method can also have multiple parameters. For example, we have a method int f, and it now has the values int x and int y. And what we can do now is return x plus y or something like that. So I have one more task for you. You will create a method which returns an integer and takes two integers as parameters. And this method should return the first integer plus the first integer times the second. So how do you do this? Create a method int f, let it take two values, and here we return a plus a times b. If there are still more questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments below. In the next episode, we will get to learn what a class is. And trust me, classes are so useful, and they are probably the first step now into working with Godot. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope to see you the next time around.